So, guys, I have recently been through quite a lot, and a lot of it is just things that I can't control. Yet, I feel like, it's heavy on my heart, and it makes it hard for me to really trust people and be an extrovert because, I suffer from remnants of my traumatic brain injury from a car crash that nearly killed me a couple years ago. So, there are instances in which I experience disorientation and confusion, and sometimes, it's just like having intermittent, like memory loss, or, like you could say something to me 10 seconds ago, and I would forget soon after, or I do it a couple times, maybe not even a couple times, it could be like 60 times. Like, per se, we're playing a video game and we've done the raid like 60 times. Even though I will probably be able to do a lot of it as I kind of learn and go, there will be things that I won't remember. And I know a lot of the times it's frustrating and it leads a lot of people to kind of say a lot of hurtful things to me. Um, so I guess I just wanted to take some time to kind of make you guys a little bit more aware of what is needed and give you some more information on it.
Memory problems can be a source of distress not only for people with brain injuries, but also for the people they live with. Most often family members, but it can be anybody else in their close circle of acquaintances or friends. The, the trouble that people have with memory problem is one that many people don't understand. And they see it as not trying hard enough or somehow not paying good enough attention. The person, him or herself, will say, no, actually, I'm paying attention. The problem is I really can't remember what you're telling me. A good example was from somebody who was in one of our studies recently, a young man who had a very severe brain injury. Fortunately, in the late period, had recovered well enough to be at home, was able to pay attention, but really couldn't remember things well. Lived with his grandmother and would have fights with his grandmother from her perspective because he irritatingly just kept asking the same question. And if he'd just pay attention in the first place, she wouldn't have to tell him stuff the second time. He, from his perspective, would get angry at her reactions to his memory problems, saying, no, 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 I'm paying attention. I just really don't remember. And her seeing it as a sign of his laziness or not trying hard enough was so out of sorts with his own experience of trying as hard as he could that it became a source of fight. And what, of course, the two of them talked to me about was the fighting and the anger in the house, which once we sort of peeled back the layers on, I was like, oh, well, this is about first, a memory failure, and second, a failure to understand the memory failure. And getting them on the same page about what was really happening, even independent of all the stuff we were doing in the study, seemed to make a big difference in their ability to live with each other happily.
And guys, there's a lot of things that go wrong. Like, there's instances in which a lot of people may think I'm just not paying attention, or I'm not present in a particular situation, and by no means is that intentional. I never mean to be rude or dismissive and not pay attention. I think it would help to know that it takes me a little bit more sometimes to truly focus on things, which, could be frustrating for other people, which I understand, right? But I just, I implore you to understand how difficult it is to be in that environment and to trust the people around you to kind of understand that you are not doing this to them and you too are trying to make the best of a bad situation. Um, but here, guys,
How do memory problems originate? In about 87% of our patients who complain of memory problems, neuropsychological testing has not found any cognitive deficits. What it's found is distractions. It's found loss of attention, loss of concentration, problems with headaches and pain, distracting, lack of sleep, distracting from the effectiveness of the memory. I'll give you an example. A soldier and I were discussing the Super Bowl right before the Super Bowl game last winter. I was talking about the football game. As we left the room, he was walking down the hall with me. We get to the end of the hall. He looks at me and goes, "Doc, I told you my memory sucks. I don't remember anything you just said." I said, "Well, let's retrace our steps and see what happened." Well, as we did, I opened up the door. He walked out. He saw doors in the hallway. He started thinking, who's in those rooms? What kind of weapons do they have in there? Whose footsteps are those coming down that connecting hallway? What if that guy has a grenade? What are we going to do? So his memory was at fault? No, he never heard what I said. His concentration.
In the period right after an injury, the problem with learning is one where even though the information is present, even though it's repeated, it doesn't sink in. And so a few minutes after something has been presented, the person might not remember that it had even been discussed. Most of us don't have that experience on a day-to-day basis. You know, if you present something, you might not remember the details, but at least you remember that it was presented. Here, it's as if the tape simply isn't recording. And as a result, a few minutes later, when somebody tries to play back what happened, it's blank. There's no information there to recall. The process of laying down information, if you will, committing it to tape, takes some days to actually recover and for people to begin to be able to play back from their own memory a story that makes sense, that isn't filled with gaps or with incomplete information. So there are a fair number of studies that have looked at the reasons why that learning is difficult. It may be different in the early period after injury than in the late period. So among the reasons in the early period after injury is first, damage to the structures that we need to pay attention, to, if you will, roll tape and commit things to memory, and then the systems that help retrieve it. Those include the upper brainstem for the keeping the lights on and beginning to pay attention, the structure we call the hippocampus, which is important for helping to lay down new memory, and then the frontal lobes to retrieve that which has already been laid down. In addition to damage to those structures, the early period after brain injury is characterized by a huge output of all kinds of neurotransmitters. The stuff that normally helps the brain function well are way higher levels than they need to be. So when I teach our residents, I say too much of a good thing is not actually good in this circumstance. When you have too much of the neurotransmitters we usually use for attention and memory, they actually take the system down and make it hard to function normally. That, as we call the neurotransmitter storm, tends to abate in the first hours to days to weeks after injury with mild or moderate or severe, respectively. Once the storm is over, it appears that some of those neurotransmitters don't simply recover to normal, but actually become deficient. In combination with direct damage to the structures you need for memory, having not enough of the neurotransmitters to help them function is, if you will, kind of a two-hit or a double whammy on those systems we need to actually learn and remember information easily. So in the late period, the problem is not enough of those chemicals as opposed to in the early, too much of them to function normally.
so guys, I think that this part will give you a little bit more of an insight of when I'm doing things and I just can't remember, regardless of being there 100 times, and people are like, didn't we just do this like a billion times? Like, how do you not know it already? Or you're just not paying attention, or you're not focused enough. And, you know, I wish in my heart of heart, my black, putrid heart, vampiric heart, that is the case, but it's not. And, you know, it really, really, really makes me sad when that's what happens, but it is the reality that I deal with. But hopefully, this could shed a little bit more light for you guys if, in fact, you do want to get to know me and be friends.
There's some great movies that when we teach our residents about memory problems after brain injury are good examples of what this is not. So, for example, the Bourne Identity, the Jason Bourne series, where he has a traumatic event and wakes up on the boat and has no idea what he is, where he's been, or the things he's done, but is able to lay down in a pristine fashion everything that happens thereafter. That is the exact opposite of what happens to most people with brain injuries. So for most people with brain injuries, after the moment of the injury event, the problem becomes learning new things. But the past is, for the most part, relatively easily recalled. And when they can lay down new things, new experiences, they get them, but they may not be complete. So as you add history to everything that follows after the injury, it becomes a less complete narrative than all the things that happened before it. Now, there is this funny period after an injury that we call retrograde amnesia. So if you have an injury today, it may be that for some minutes or hours, or in more severe injuries, days or weeks before the injury, some of that information is lost. I mentioned before the idea of consolidation, right? That once you have represented information in your head, it takes some time, if you will, some processes to get that information to be stable and available for later recall. Well, once you have that injury, that neurotransmitter storm and the damage to those structures interrupts the process of consolidating information. So it's very common that people would have difficulty learning or recalling the stuff that had happened just before the injury. There have been a number of fairly famous examples in the popular press of somebody who is in a car wreck and has an injury, and the media is waiting for them to wake up to tell them what happened just before the injury. This is one of the, I think, major problems with our understanding in popular press about brain injuries. That person is very unlikely to be able to recall those details. The nature of injury itself, if they've injured the brain, will interrupt having laid down those memories of the things that happened just before. What is pretty common is that afterwards people tell them the story of what has happened, and with enough rehearsal and enough time, it begins to feel as though it's from their own memory. But in fact, they're remembering is the story that's been told to them, filling in the gaps of that loss of memory for things that weren't finished being consolidated, rather than a narrative that actually comes from their own recall and experience.
All in all, guys, I did my best to try to provide something to help you guys get to know me a little better and kind of meet me where I'm at, and a lot of the things that people say to me are very damaging and hurtful, and I've been hurt not just by strangers, but by people that are close to me, and they may not even realize it, right? Like when they lash out and get mad at me for things that I can't control. And of course there are times when I'm silly or distracted, but it is never malicious, and communication is key, you know? And at the end of the day, I guess if you choose to build a friendship with me, then all I ask is that when you're frustrated, just keep in mind that I'm struggling on the other end as well. And I do understand where you're coming from. If if that does become frustrating. But I don't know. This is just difficult for me to speak on. So I think I'm going to end it there and really, really hope that I did a good job in helping you guys understand my situation. And thank you for taking the time out of your day for being here.